So before sharing these conclusive thoughts, I would like to thank warmly our panelists and moderators who have accepted to give their time and to share their thoughts to be with us yesterday and this morning. This format was not an easy one, and we are very grateful to you for your participation. I would like also to thank especially the French Consulate and the French Embassy for their support in this idea, each member of the organization committee, Jason Bernstein, Hayana Howard, Emory Jacob, Margot Bernelin, Paul Volpe, John Benja, and Alison Keir and Jamila Garrett-Bell from the Center for Ethics, who all have contributed behind the scenes to make it a success. So thank you very much to everyone. We suggested the symposium for a discussion on the ethical management of AI across the Atlantic to highlight the path, ethical or legal, which are to be considered to benefit from the AI development and deployment, and to mitigate the ethical risks. During these debates, some of us have mentioned explicitly or in implied terms that this question was too late, or too early, or too big, and that the question was indeed how to keep control of the technologies, which are full of promises, and to keep them for their very best. During the students' perspective panel, I was struck by one question made by a student on AGI, and I thought that the core issue was well reflected. The question was, do we have a say? If we are considering it in broader meaning, it refers to the human empowerment, to the trust we can build on any issue related to AI. What to decide on AI ethics? What would we make about AI? What makes AI ethical? How to decide on AI ethics? When to adopt AI ethics positions? Who is to be accountable in case of harm made by AI? And would we as humans in our different roles and identities have a say in the development of AI? And it seemed that whereas French and Americans share the same aspirations in terms of AI approaches to build, as mentioned yesterday by Olivier Grasset, AI for humans, we have in France, Europe, and in the US, different approaches to explore AI by humans. So if I'm looking for AI for humans, in the description made by Matthew Scherer of the AI ethics tree, Matthew mentioned the roots, the branches, and the fruits, and many times in our discussions, it has been repeated that we should be aware of getting the best of AI, not just from a technical point of view, but from an ethical point of view. This is to say that AI should be designed, developed, and deployed for humans and to the benefit of all humans. Taking great advantage of the great fruits also means that in our nations, as well as at the international level, we should keep the possibility in a position to refuse or even to prohibit the poorest fruits or the rotten fruits. To take the image of Mathieu Scherer and Henri Verdier. In saying it, we had some consensus on the ethical principles which should guide further our discussions as long as we consider it as aspirations. We insisted that going from aspirational principles to practical rules should involve much more discussions, especially through the different fields of AI development. These aspirations, which emerged from our discussions, were gathered in 6 categories by Paul Volpe, and I hope that Paul will forgive me to draw them in this format. So Paul suggested that there would be 6 categories. The first should be and would be the internal, and mentioning design, reliability, and transparency. Second one, external, with privacy, commodification, and safety. The third, with responsibility, accountability, and liability behind the words legal. The fourth, social, with justice for equity, fair access to data, fair use of AI, job displacement, and fairness. The fifth, relational, especially regarding robot companions. And the sixth, existential and superintelligence, where abdication of human agency is at stake. As aspirations, these categories are quite similar from one continent to the other, except maybe the expectations on environmental sustainable AI, which is firmly required in Europe, especially in the different official documents published by the European Commission and the European Parliament in 2020. Amongst these aspirations, the most challenging issues were said to be located mostly in the social category. As reflected in the news, indeed, bias and discrimination leading to unfairness, job displacement, freedom of speech, which means fake news and hate speech, and the role of public authorities have been mentioned as the issues to be addressed in the near future. However, our debates this morning showed that beyond the words, privacy is not dealt in the same way in Europe and in the States, and is not defined in the same way either. The complexity of it was identified fairly, with priority given to effectiveness in the US and raising issues about the ownership of data and the consent to share personal data. And that finally, nevertheless, it is crucial to build trust in AI. Especially regarding trust now, we also mentioned the complexity of the ways to build it, especially in regards to data and bias. And we discussed about the ways to manage data and algorithm to create a trust climate. How to evaluate an algorithm, how to check that the algorithm works well. And we mentioned the difficulty to define whose interests are involved when we are building trust. Speaking about human oversight, we also noted the complexity of getting to a meaningful human oversight, asking who is the operator and how to manage liabilities of the person or the product. So we all agreed that these thoughts should be further adjusted to the field and the context when going from aspirational to practical considerations. So we had some consensus as for AI for humans. Regarding AI by humans now, beyond our consensus on AI ethics aspirations, our discussion showed another consensus on the expectations to see AI made by humans. But our debates highlighted that European and American approaches to ensure AI by humans are really different and could appear at some point conflictual, meaning that we will have to work at combining and conciliating these approaches. First, we shared some thoughts about the timeline, as mentioned previously. Is it too early to draft ethical rules on AI, considering that from our experiencing and depending on the fields and the level of maturity of AI implementation in industries, regulation settles before experimentations might kill initiatives? And in the meantime, we asked with Igor Jablokov whether we should have to wait 5 years for a catastrophe and end up spending 15 years to repair it. So, if we had some consensus on the obligation to get to a public conversation with a large variety of stakeholders and even to obtain a collective consent, as mentioned by Henri Verdier, our panelists described it two different approaches. An approach based on the culture of contract and experimentations, which is key into soft law. In this culture of contract and experimentation, ethical issues are to be addressed through bilateral agreements, and conflicts can be remediated through mediation without commitment from public authorities. Such approach brings more flexibility and allows more space for experimentations, initiatives, and creativity. It also allows to speed the processes, which for the industries in a competitive market is fairly needed. These features are more developed in a context of on-time regulation, which is quite efficient due to the role of social norms and wide recognition of individual responsibility in society. This context is to be more keen to educational programs and to develop awareness of potential harm on ethical issues. The other approach is based on the culture of strong regulations and strong institutions, and it is more involving hard law. Referring to the story of ethics in Europe, Cédric Villani showed us that Europe has built, since the Second World War, a vast network of legal concepts, legal regulations, and strong institutions. In this approach, public authorities are to adopt large and strict regulations with reference to fundamental rights. That is to say, dignity, freedom of speech, right to private life, right to the protection of personal data, and other further categories of rights, the right to access to information and to data, the right to modify the personal data, the right to erase data, the right to opt out, and portability rights. This approach also refers to autonomous definitions of concepts, different processes to follow, certifications to get, and remedy procedures before independent agencies in case the things goes wrong. In such a legal environment, in October 2020, the European Parliament has suggested to the European Commission the drafting of a regulation with far-reaching impact for AI activities. In this document, the European Parliament suggests that AI activities falling under the category of high risk by their fields or by their use should make a risk assessment and get a European certificate of ethical compliance. Finally, this initiative suggests that national administrative agencies should supervise cases of non-compliance of these regulations. If this European composition was to be confirmed, the contrast between the two approaches would be huge and could appear as quite conflicting between over-regulation in one continent and maybe under-regulation in the other. However, as mentioned by Cédric Villani, we will need to conciliate both approaches, and considering that we all share the same interest for AI, the international stage might help us. For instance, passing from aspiration to practice means that we could adjust the positions by sectors and include experts at the operational level. It has been mentioned also that the proposition made by France to create the Global Partnership on AI, gathering multi-stakeholders from Canada, India, the UK, the US, South Korea, and others. This initiative, launched in 2019, intends to develop practical discussions between the stakeholders about the challenges and the best practices. In other words, and to wrap it up, dialogue as the one you all accepted to be involved here should be the ways to build further milestone in an AI definitely for humans and by humans. Thank you so much.
And thank you all for participating in the conference, and especially the program committee for putting it together. I just quickly want to follow up on some of the comments that Anne Elizabeth made, especially with regard to this issue about regulation and about, well, really the foundational issue of our conference, which is translating ethics into artificial intelligence. I want to recall Paul Wolpe's opening comments about how if you look at guidelines and codes and white paper recommendations on ethics in artificial intelligence, you see that they're very aspirational. They're not very well particularized. They're idealistic. And I think that that really provides us with two challenges, or really we can ask, why are they aspirational? And I think one reason that they're aspirational is because the foundational values of these aspirations, values around human rights, around transparency, fairness, justice, risk, benefits, harms, they're not well defined. They tend to be debatable, especially in ethically pluralistic societies, such as we have in the United States and in the West. They're vague. They're unreliable from person to person. So if we can't agree on how we interpret and mean and intend these foundational values that are presumably going to inform regulations, well, we're not going to be able to apply them very well to regulations. Our application attempts and efforts are going to be very, very fraught. And I would remind you that in the United States, probably the reason that I have a job is because we disagree about so many things in medicine and in healthcare. We disagree about abortion and reproductive rights. We disagree about access to healthcare. We disagree about death and dignity. We disagree about fairness. And when it comes to one of the central concerns of our conference, namely regulation, we have on the anti-regulatory side, that is to say, really our government and private sector side, we have their values. And their values are that regulation is a bad thing because it stifles innovation. Compliance costs are expensive. We get unintended consequences when we pass legislation. Regulations and laws are difficult to enforce, and they discourage international businesses. On the other hand, on the other side, people who favor regulation, they favor it because they're concerned about their safety. They're concerned about privacy. They want to mitigate risk. They want to mitigate bias. And they're also very, very concerned about monopolies. And if you checked your news feed this morning, you probably saw that the European Union has waged an antitrust suit against Amazon, claiming that Amazon is a monopoly, and the European Union is looking to fine Amazon $10 billion. If you look at marketplace attitudes towards AI ethics, or really ethics in general, marketplace attitudes towards ethics in general, I think they break down into three categories. On the one hand, you have businesses and organizations that want to do the right thing because it is the right thing. They're going to do the right thing when nobody is watching them. You have another set of businesses that are going to do the right thing because it's profitable to do the right thing. They believe that moral values are important for maintaining their income flows, and so they're going to be moral for that reason. And then on the other hand, you got a third group of businesses who will do whatever they will enhance profitability, and they'll hope that they don't get caught. I think that ultimately we don't have enough experience with AI models to chart an ethical course. And yes, we're worried about biased algorithms now, and we do have some examples, but there are just so many ethical dimensions of AI uses that are going to perhaps be unethical, but nevertheless be legal. I can give you a quick example. let us say you're a loan mortgage company, or you're a credit application company, and you use place of residence in your algorithm as a predictive factor or predictive feature. So in other words, your algorithm is going to look at where this loan applicant lives and is going to make a decision as to whether or not he or she would be a good credit applicant or a good credit risk or not a good credit risk. Well, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act would say you can't use race as a predictive variable, you can't use religion, you can't use ethnicity, but place of residence is not covered in Title VII. So in other words, a company could use place of residence as a discriminating factor, even though a lot of other people would say that's discrimination. So, and also concerns about privacy. Well, think about when you download an app on your mobile phone. Generally, you have two choices. Do you want this app? Do you not want this app? If you want the app, you're going to have to agree to the terms and conditions of the app. And very, very frequently, those terms and conditions are that you consent to allow the app developer or the app owner to use the data that you're logging in there, however that app owner wants. So in the end, I was impressed with Igor's comment yesterday that, with regard to the ethics in AI, we're really going to make it up as we go. If you recall, Igor remarked about the next 5 years, we're going to see 5 years of probably very robust implementation of AI in healthcare, in the marketplace in general. And then we're going to spend another 5 years evaluating how this has turned out. So, how safe then do I feel with some model knowing more about me than I do about myself? And can I trust that model not to hurt me? And when we talk about hurts and harms, what in fact are we talking about? So to return to our question about regulating AI, I think we're going to see a kind of a balancing act here. The free market advocates on one side of the scale are going to prioritize and emphasize things like profits and innovation, quality product, and so on. The consumer safety people are going to emphasize things like individual rights, collective welfare, mitigating harms, and how are we understanding fairness to play out in this algorithm. So what we're going to see is a kind of a balancing act that ultimately is going to boil down to an experiment. It's going to be trial and error. And in fact, I would leave you with this thought that that's what morality has always been. Morality has always been coming up with rules and beliefs and practices and intuitions about how human beings can best relate to one another, how they can most peaceably and profitably relate to one another. So I hope we don't mess it up too badly, and that I hope that we see these AI models ultimately delivering a lot more utility than harm. And I will end with that.
Thank you so much, John. This was great, and I think we could begin another symposium from our conclusions because we would like to further comment on that. I was wondering if we have any, and go back to our attendees. Would you like, after this symposium, to share some comments or some ideas regarding the next steps you would like to see discussed and the format of it? Maybe it's too late, and maybe some of you would like to answer to this question by emails or not yet. Okay, so we would like, I think that we will come back to you soon regarding what should and could be next. in the path of collaborating between France and the US, Europe and the US, maybe with Canada as well, in order to make further steps. Maybe Pascal and Rami would like to have a word. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you. Just testing my mic. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Great. Thank you so much, Anne-Elisabeth, and thank you, John, for the concluding remarks that summarized really well the key highlights of this webinar. And also thank you all for your efforts and everything you put into organizing this seminar, especially Anne-Elisabeth. We cannot thank you enough for all the work you have done to put together this event. It was a real pleasure working with you and with the whole organizing team. Over yesterday and today's session, we have listened and learned about different perspectives regarding the ethics of AI, and you summarized it very well. And we hope that this will lead to more discussion in the future. We had the chance to have exceptional speakers in the sessions, and we really believe that the French-American dialogue is crucial to nurture our thoughts and to determine our policies on this matter. So we really hope that we keep this conversation going, and it makes tangible collaboration emerge in the future. As you all know, this webinar was part of the annual France Atlanta conference created in 2010 by the Consular General of France in Atlanta and Georgia Tech. This year's edition was made possible through the partial support of RFS and Family Foundation, Jade Fiducial, and the French-American Chamber of Commerce in Atlanta. As France Atlanta was entirely virtual this year due to the pandemic, it was a great opportunity to widen our audience and include participants from across the two sides of the pond. I will only say that this great French-American dialogue on ethics of AI was only the beginning of, I hope, a great dialogue that will be ongoing. But it was the last event of France Atlanta 2020. So we will hopefully meet next year for France Atlanta 2021, hoping that next year's edition will be in person. So on behalf of the scientific services of the Embassy of France in the United States and the Consulate of France in Atlanta, I tell you à très bientôt for new adventures and more interesting dialogues on interesting topics like this one. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, indeed, Rami, thank you. It was a great pleasure seeing all these faces today and hearing from experts from both sides of the Atlantic. This event has certainly brought some important ideas forward, and it has been a real dialogue between French and American perspectives. Lastly, we would like to thank all the speakers who participated in the event, as well as the audience, and to acknowledge the great work and energy that made this event possible, and all the organizing team who helped put together such a rich content and a lineup of inspiring speakers, mostly Paul, Ruth Rolf, Jason Borenstein, John Benja, Ayana Howard, Emory Jacob, Rami, Abby Hackle, Vincent Michelot, Xavier Bressot, Kevin Koch-Hang, Alison Keir, Anne-Lise Gallet, Madhu Mandra, Yann Meust, and the great leadership of Anne-Elisabeth Courrier. Again, many thanks to all of you. I wish you a pleasant rest of your day or evening, and we look forward to hearing from all of you and learning about the great synergies that were incepted from today's discussions. France Atlanta 2020 is now over. Thank you very much.